Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Christopher George, the Solution Series. Today's episode, Black Power, Black Unity, the Stabilizing Force, is a pivot point for me. It's about Black leadership stepping forward, not to divide, but to stabilize. Not opposition, not symbolism, but leadership. A disciplined call to help stabilize America with everyone willing to build. Listen up, this isn't about power over country, it's about responsibility for it. For those of you who are returning listeners, welcome back. And for those of you who are new, welcome. Before we get into today's discussion, I want to take a few minutes to set expectations. If you've heard this before, this is a good time to grab a cup of coffee. If you haven't, well, this opening matters because it explains how I approach leadership, solutions, and this platform. Also, I attached the execution matrix for this podcast it's downloadable. We're going to talk about that on the second part of this. This podcast is broken down into two because because the second part I want to really get into depth on that execution matrix, which is very general, but gives you some highlights of what I'm thinking about. But the second part of this podcast will get really deep into that execution matrix. Here's the standard, guys. Leadership isn't just talking. Leadership isn't just pointing out what's wrong. Leadership comes prepared with a plan and the courage to talk about it openly. The plan I bring isn't rigid. It's strong enough to move us forward and flexible enough to improve through focused conversation. Because the best plan will always be the one shaped by the most thoughtful input. And that's the expectation here. This space I developed is for discussion, but discussion with purpose. If you engage, please be direct, be respectful, focus your energy on the plan. If you see a flaw, bring a fix. If you have a what if, bring a solution with it. Guys, noise doesn't move us forward. We've seen how that's working. Thoughtful contribution does. This podcast is about America, but it's not limited to America because we are intertwined with this world, whether you believe it or not. We live in a connected world. Many of the solutions discussed here can be applied anywhere people are working to build stability, dignity, and opportunity. My goal is to help America lead again, not by force, but by example, so others can adapt what works for their own communities through our leadership. And let me be clear about something I believe deeply. I believe there's always a nugget of truth and experience and insight. In every person, there's something valuable, something learned, something earned, something seen from a perspective no one else has. That's why I welcome everyone to the table. I mean, without you, there's no us. Without shared experience, there's no progress. But with that welcome comes responsibilities. Those insights and experiences are meant to build, not tear down, to strengthen ideas, not sabotage them, to move us closer to solutions, not deeper into the division. That's the future I'm trying to realize for us people. Because our tools are more powerful than they've ever been. Our ability to build is out of this world, and our ability to destroy is even more out of this world. That means we have a responsibility to do better, to think deeper, to lead smarter, and to work towards a peace that works for everyone, not just a few. Guys, this is about evolution of our minds and people. Evolution as a country, evolution as a people, evolution as a world. That's the expectation, and that's the standard. Now let's get to work. Before I begin, I want to make something clear about something else. I'm always make something. If you listen to my podcast, I'm always going to make something very clear. This episode is directed primarily at my Black community. I'm speaking directly to Black Americans because I believe we possess tremendous institutional strength, talent, and historical experience that has not been fully organized towards stabilizing the country we all share. But make no mistake, this is not a message meant to exclude anyone. This is an American conversation. What I'm discussing here is about organizing leadership and capacity in a way that helps strengthen the nation itself. And if you care about the future of this country, no matter your background, then this conversation concerns you too. Because what I'm proposing cannot happen in isolation. It requires partnership. It requires cooperation. It requires people of every background who are willing to build, not just comment. I'm seriously tired of the noise. So while this message speaks directly to Black Americans about stepping forward in leadership and coordination, I want everyone listening to understand something clearly up front. You are part of that audience too. Listen closely, understand the vision, because when it's time to build, this will require people from every community, Black, Hispanic, Asian, white, indigenous, immigrant, native born, anyone willing to help stabilize and strengthen the country we all live in. This is about responsibility. This is about contribution. This is about building something stronger together. Our strength is our unity. And with that understood, let's talk about my vision. Because what I'm about to share with you is a vision, not a complaint, not a speech, not an argument, a true vision. And it begins with reality, or it begins in reality, I say, because we are at war right now. No commentary, no panic. It's just the truth. I'm a soldier. I understand it. I don't understand the whys of this one, but I understand it. Somewhere tonight, decisions are being made that move aircraft, ships, intelligence, lives. Somewhere tonight, families are watching headlines with quiet anxiety. Somewhere tonight, young men and women are standing in uniform. That is not abstract. That's now. So close your eyes and imagine. Imagine a nation already tense, now carrying the weight of conflict. Cities restless. Communities unsure whether tomorrow brings stability or escalation. Signs of military breaking through and protesters in the streets. Imagine a world wealthy beyond imagination, yet morally unsettled beneath the surface, where power concentrates, where influence shields itself, where cycles of scandal and the exploitation of the vulnerable rise and fade, and accountability feels temporary. Imagine infrastructure aging while attention shifts elsewhere, water systems quietly deteriorating, neighborhoods where clean water, safe housing, and stable food access are not guaranteed. Imagine migration driven not by ambition, but by collapse. Imagine schools preparing children for exams, but not preparing them for responsibility. Imagine that nothing seems to move unless it's profitable, unless it fits an established power lane. And in that space, imagine a people, educated, capable, resilient, but not aligned, reacting instead of shaping, scrolling instead of structuring, commenting instead of building. Pause there, because that is the darkness, not explosion, not apocalypse. I want to call it drift, because we're here, but we're not really doing anything. You know, I'm a soldier, and I understand that drift during peacetime is dangerous, but drift during war is fatal. And I don't say that as a commentator, because I am a soldier. In the military, we don't wait for chaos to organize us. We study drift, we prepare for it, we war game in it. We train for the moment when small weaknesses become strategic liabilities. Because on the battlefield, when you start to drift, it costs lives. Unaligned units, unclear command, broken logistics, complacency in quiet seasons. That's how nations lose ground. And a commander who sees drift and says nothing, it's not neutral, he's negligent. So when I speak about alignment, discipline, and structure, I'm not speaking emotionally, I'm speaking operationally. A soldier looks at terrain, a commander looks at assets. He asks one question. Are we positioned for stability if pressure increases? Drift during peace is a warning. Drift during war is an exposure. And what I see right now is not a lack of talent, not a lack of intelligence, and not a lack of alignment. And I mean, and I'm talking to the Black community. Remember that now. And alignment is exactly what soldiering is designed to produce. Now imagine something else. In the middle of that drift, that complacency, a disciplined vision appears. Not a protest, definitely not a personality, not a reaction, a structured plan. And from that plan, light begins to break. One ray, then another. 8 rays of disciplined light cutting through uncertainty. One ray restoring professionalism and consistency in policing. So stability at home is not negotiable during instability abroad. One ray protecting the vote. So democracy functions as infrastructure, not chaos, especially when the world is watching. One ray restructuring immigration, replacing desperation with preparation. One ray rebuilding housing, engineered, durable, replicable. One ray embedding food production into neighborhoods so supply chains don't determine survival. One ray transforming waste into structure, ownership instead of dependency. One ray replacing veteran discipline beside instability. Stability by presence, not by force. One ray reforming education. Classrooms training thinkers, leaders, architects of the future. 8 rays, not emotional, operational, aligned. And understand this, at critical points in American history, when it's come to drifted or fractured, Black Americans have often stepped into the gap. At its founding, Black blood marked the early struggle for liberty. In the Civil War, Black soldiers strengthened the Union when manpower determined survival. In global wars, we defended freedoms we were still fighting to receive. During the Cold War, the war I was in, the moral force of the civil rights movement strengthened America's global legitimacy. Maybe that's why I feel the way I feel right now, because that was a time, when we were out feeling what we was doing was right. Time and again, in moments of instability, we've helped push this nation back towards its better self. Not because we owned it, because we believed in it. Dr. King had a dream. He imagined inclusion, belonging, unity. But he did not live in an era with the institutional access, technological infrastructure, economic scale, and organizational networks that exist today. His dream imagined us sitting together. This vision imagined us coordinating, not just being together, but becoming a stabilizing force. Not just asking for justice, but helping design structure. Not waiting to be invited, but offering blueprints. We act as if this country has been built and there's no longer no more improvement unless, and hear this clearly, we're not outsiders proposing reform. This is our home. Our blood is in this soil, shed in chains, shed in fields, shed in factories, shed in foreign battlefields under the same flag. We built this nation with hands that were not always protected by it. We defended freedoms we didn't always fully enjoy. That gives us not just a right, but a responsibility. That's where I'm at right now. Being responsible for this country, because we got some very irresponsibility going on right now. I laugh, but it's killing me. Seriously. Not to tear this country down, not to walk away, but to strengthen it. We have a right to strengthen this country, to take everything we've endured and turn it to structure, planned by us, executed by everyone. Black, brown, Hispanic, Asian, white, anyone willing to build. Hear what I said. Planned by us, executed by everyone. Anyone willing to build. Because this is not about ethnic dominance. I know a lot of people are going to see black power, black unity. Ooh, they're trying to take over. Here they come. No, it's not that. This is institutional contribution. I'm sorry for that little side piece. When you get to know me, you think I'm real. I like to joke around a lot, but don't confuse the issues here. I'm a soldier and I'm serious about this country. This is institutional contribution. And it does not have to begin with dependency. It can begin with coordination, with celebration, with multi-level festivals, summits, innovation gatherings, where cultural funds, infrastructure, where unity finances systems, where capacity is demonstrated before policy is requested. No violence, no combustion, no killing each other to prove frustration. Learning the hard lessons of the past, choosing construction over chaos. Imagine headlines about competence. Imagine systems too disciplined to decay. Imagine war abroad met with stability at home. Imagine drift replaced by alignment. This is the vision, not fantasy, feasibility, because every system has rules. If we learn the rules, we can operate within them. If we operate with discipline, we can expand them. The question is not whether it can be done. The question is whether we are ready to align at that level. So I'm going to be honest with you. I'm tired of waiting for somebody to step in and do something. We had a president. We have all these damn senators and congressmen. Who's leading the effort? Where is the effort? Because I'm not seeing nothing. Excuse me. Because when moral strength meets structural discipline, the people stop reacting to history and start shaping it. So open your eyes. This is the vision. And tonight we begin. After I did a podcast in 2024, and I asked, what's next? We had a black president, we had representation, we had access, but is access the finish line? And then recently in this last, in 2025, it became about accountability. And somewhere between those two reflections, while I'm on that, listening to my stuff online and researching and stuff like that, all the algorithms started feeding me all these old Malcolm X clips and Black Power quotes and old speeches and old footage of civil rights. And, most of it I already knew. But, when you don't see that stuff in a long time and when you see it as you mature, you should look at it in a different way. Because what it did is got me to thinking about Black Power. Or more importantly, what does Black Power actually mean in 2026? I mean, is it cultural pride? Is it symbolism? Is it a fist? Or is it a thing at all? Historically in the black community, we had the Black Panther Party with their community patrols, food programs, political theory, localized control. We had the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, who represented moral pressure on campaigns, coordinated civil disobedience. We had the Nation of Islam, who taught self-sufficiency frameworks and economic independence. We had the NAACP, who represented our litigation strategy and constitutional enforcement. We had the National Urban League, workforce and economic stabilization, a lot of agencies. And what all these agencies had in common, they focused on one primary lever at a time, whether it be civil rights, community defense, economic empowerment, litigation, political representation. So I put on my military hat, 27 years, my adult life. That's probably the only hat I can put on. Not to militarize anything. Don't guys, when I put on my military stuff, don't think I'm trying to, oh hell, he's finna do his military thing. No. But to think like a planner. Because in the military we don't plan, we don't start planning with emotion. We start by identifying our assets. What do we have available to accomplish the mission? If I'm a commander on the battlefield, I look out and I see what I got: infantry, I got armor, I got air, I got logistics, I got all these tools to use to accomplish a mission. So I asked, if Black Power is real, what assets do we have? And the first thing I saw was historically black colleges, the HBCUs, their engineering programs, the research talent, their young minds, because, my lit transformations calls for to create these templated housing. Lit stands for low income transformation for you. I got a program that I will talk about that later. Don't distract me. And I didn't want to talk to inspiration. I wanted execution. I was reaching out to the HBCUs. I wanted to get something done. So I came up with this idea. I said, you know what, Chris, contact the HBCU engineering departments. Say, hey, let's create a engineering challenge amongst the HBC black engineering departments. Not a symbolic one either, because there's a goal in this one, is to create the templates for the metamaterial housings that I want to templated housings that I want to create to start reshaping the poor community. These AI engineered housings. And have a national HBCU engineering competition with a real prize awarded to the team that could design a workable metamaterial housing template tied to my low income transformational model. The winning design would not be absorbed. And see, my thinking, my strategic thinking was, the HBCU consortium that we put together would own the intellectual property design from this, because we got all these schools. There's some good things that could come out of this. And then they would co-own the template, because I ain't stupid. They could own the platform. They would co-own the recycling facility concept tied to it. So anything from this movement gets pushed back into the HBCU programs. They get the money. Full future licensing revenue, future manufacturing rights, institutional ownership. It sounds like a good plan to me. So let me tell you a story real quick. But on the surface, it was housing. I was talking about housing, but Modular, dignified, storm-resistant homes, not trailer parks, but modern structures built from recycled materials and replaced strategically in underserved communities. Beautiful houses, bringing dignity to the poor community. Because I never understood why poor people have to look poor. We have plastic now. We can build fake looking. We can build houses that look like real houses and make people, But we do it one community at a time. Engineering dignity. That was the visible layer of what I was trying to do. The deeper purpose was unity through construction. That was my ultimate plan here, guys. Unity through construction. Because for generations, we've asked, why can't we come together? Why can't we focus our talent? Why do conversations fall apart? Why does our energy scatter into argument instead of outcome? Why does every discussion become a contest of status instead of a search for solutions? Because too often the focus becomes who is speaking instead of what is being solved. This project was designed to remove that, not with speeches, but with shared tasks. A single point of focus, a real problem, should force a different behavior. That's my mindset now. A single point of focus large enough that ego had to shrink to participation, and whatever you're an expert in had to step forward. A project practical enough that debate had to be given away to contribution. Like I said, something real, measurable, and undeniable. Because unity doesn't form around conversation, it forms around work, I think. And when the mission is real, you don't prove yourself with words, you prove yourself with contribution. And I was intentional about where the work would begin. Not with celebrities, not with politics, with thinkers and builders. The young engineers, designers, planners, and problem solvers coming out of our schools. The next generation of leadership. But you know what? Intelligence alone isn't enough. Experience must shape it. Critical thinking must discipline it, and responsibility must mature it. It no longer matters what title you're carrying, what you do for a living, how loud you speak, or how important you believe you are. I think the only currency that becomes useful moving forward, guys, is what you bring to solve the problem. Now, if we do that, then ego has no oxygen. Credibility must be demonstrated, not declared. You don't come to the table to validate yourself. You come prepared or you don't come at all. I don't want to hear what you think you can do. I want to hear what you got. And that changes the culture of interaction, right? Instead of arguing for position, people organize around expertise. Instead of talking over each other, people defer to knowledge. Instead of why should I listen to you, the question becomes who understands this part best? That is how builders operate, which is why the effort intentionally began with engineers. Not because engineers are more important, but because builders settle arguments with reality. I have a vision, but I'm not the builder, So the responsibility moves to, in my mind, the responsibility moves to those whose lane is construction, design systems, materials planning. The people trained to turn ideas into structures. In that environment, conversation changes. Opinion steps back, preparation steps forward. You must know what you're talking about. You must have done the work. You must be ready to contribute. Because now the community isn't debating identity, it's solving a problem. All right. And like I said, if we could accomplish one large constructive achievement together, we couldn't just improve housing. We could change how we interact. We would prove coordination. We would prove trust. We would prove capability. And once people learn to organize around solutions instead of personalities, I think progress will accelerate. So all those listening, this wasn't about replacing anyone. It wasn't about taking anything. It was about contributing structurally, helping shape the environment we live in so it reflects dignity instead of neglect. Not protest power, not symbolic power, constructive power. A first coordinated effort, a foundation where preparation matters more than persona and contribution matters more than recognition. When I reached out to the HBCUs, that was the plan. So I reached out. Mass email. I think it had like 24. And I went online and got all the engineering departments and all the HBCUs. So I'm not putting names or nothing. I'm not here to bust anybody out, nothing like that. I didn't get any response. Not one. And I used my little chat GPT and put this little powerful letter together talking about it's time for us to get together. We have the tools now that King never had. We have more tools now. There's no reason, I did everything I was supposed to do. So I was like, to say I was disappointed, frustrated more, but I do as a soldier does. I adjust it. I got on LinkedIn and I started looking up people, HBCU people, representatives, and I found one that I felt had interaction with all the HBCUs. Not to pitch anything to them, not to ask for money, but to ask for guidance. My goal was simple. How do I approach HBCUs the right way so this idea actually reaches the people capable of executing it? I sent her I sent a read ahead so the vision was clear of what I sent to the HBCUs. And I got them on the phone. But it was clear up front. The conversation didn't center on the vision that I was trying to I had. It primarily centered on access. The message I was getting was plain. If you don't already know people inside, you probably won't get in. Not here's how to refine your approach, not here who you might care about this, or not even let's talk about whether this is valuable or even if this is a vision. It was, the focus to me seemed administrative. When you're talking to HBCUs, don't tell them about, Black history. They know their history. You might want to look at getting a grant. I'm trying to change the world. I don't need a grant to change. I don't even want your money. you know, but I listen, because I'm a soldier. You don't always hear what you want to hear. Some good ideas came out. And one thing that really got me was, they said, well, how do you know your message even got to the right people? What separates your message from spam? And that almost knocked me down right there. Cause that, bam. How do you know when you send something to somebody and you're trying to change the world? How do you know you wouldn't be spam? Initially I was going to do a podcast on Martin Luther King in 2026. Would he be spam? That's a valid question. I mean, that was a very valid question. Then another thing was, did I think, since I'm a soldier, did I think about reaching out to the ROTCs in the HBCUs? I thought about it for a hot second, but I don't need cadets. I need engineers. So I kind of realized that there wasn't going to be nothing coming out of this. So I asked a simple professional courtesy, and I've done this before. I said, since the ROTC was the recommendation, I said, would you be willing to introduce me to any, some of those HBCU ROTC individuals? No. What? This is one of my sisters now. What? No, I don't know you. I just gave you a vision of trying to change the world. I didn't ask for no money, but you don't know. That really bothered me. 25 of years of military service. Like I said, I wasn't asking funding. I wasn't asking for any recognition. I wasn't asking for any. I was only asking I thought it was a professional courtesy. The door to be open so a proposal could be evaluated on merit. But the door stayed closed. Not because the idea was rejected, but because the person was unfamiliar with me. That's different from me. That's not disagreement. That's filtration. So not to be daunted, I asked myself a serious question. Are we even evaluating ideas, for us, for Black people? Are we even, like I said, Black power, is it even alive? Are any dreams alive for that matter? How would we know? Because are we only evaluating access? Because movements don't begin with credentials. They begin with someone bringing something new to the table. But if there's no table to put it on, what the hell? What the hell? Who the hell? If access becomes the prerequisite to being heard, then innovation becomes nearly impossible, especially from the outside. That was the real impact of the conversation for me. But I didn't get anger, but it gave me some more clarity. We say we want leadership, but do we recognize it if it doesn't arrive already endorsed? We say we want solutions, but are we structured to hear? Are we structured enough to hear them? Because what I encountered wasn't, like I said, it wasn't resistance, it was insulation. Insulation prevents coordination. So the question stopped being whether my idea was good or bad. The question became, have we built systems that only accept familiar voices? I got to be HBCU to go talk to HBCU? Do I got to be in Congress to go speak to Congress? Do I got to be a church member to go talk at the church? If my idea is trying to change everything and better for every goddamn body, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. How does and if so, how does anything new ever begin? But then the realize they forced me to widen the lens. Not to be, like I said, I'm not quitting, guys. I'm on this because we ain't doing nothing. So this conversation taught me something deeper than the email etiquette and all that good stuff. It showed me I may be speaking a language that our black civilians, most civilians are not used to hearing from anymore. I come from a military planning background. And in that world, when a problem appears, we don't begin with identity. We begin with capability. We ask who is trained to do what lane does each unit own, and how do we align those lanes toward a shared objective? It's not personal, it's functional. If engineers build bridges, we call engineers. If logistics moves supply, we call logistics. If intelligence gathers information, we call intelligence. No one feels diminished by that. Because in a mission-oriented culture, being relied upon for your specialty is respect. It means your competence matters. So when I reached out to an HBCU engineering department and said, you are engineers, I need engineering thought on a national problem, I was not lecturing history. I was not asserting superiority. I was not assigning status. I was doing what I was trained to do. Align capability towards purpose. But the response felt different. It felt as if responsibility sounded like hierarchy, like as if calling professionals to engage in a problem sounded like telling them who they were. And that forced a hard question. Are we prepared for functional leadership? Not personality leadership, not recognition leadership, not who gets credit leadership, but leadership that simply says, here's the mission, here's your expertise, let's align it. Because I'm not claiming I can design the housing. I'm not claiming I can engineer desalination systems. I'm not claiming I can draft legal frameworks. I'm saying the opposite. I have a vision shaped by experience. But specialists must build the future. And calling someone to their expertise is not disrespect. It is trust. Today we have programmers, we have engineers, we have lawyers, urban planners, policy experts, veterans, education, movie stars, sports stars. We have more capability than any generation before us. So this is no longer an era of proving we are equal. I'm beyond that shit. This is an area of proving we are organized. Dr. King warned about this in principle, not ego, but discipline. He taught that the progress requires organized intelligence, not scattered passion. That movements fail when emotion replaces structure. And that's the part we don't like to hear. Unity is not agreement. Unity is coordination. Coordination requires humility. It requires hearing. You are needed here without translating into you are being diminished. Because ego is expensive. Disorganization is fatal. And talent without alignment changes nothing. So before we even talk about Black power, before we even talk about movements, we have to ask, are we ready to put mission above identity, function above pride, responsibility above recognition? Because what I'm laying out next is not inspiration, it's alignment. And alignment is the next level of freedom. Like I said, the conversation with the HBCUs didn't give me answers, it gave me perspective. Because walking away from it, I didn't feel disagreement, I felt scale. It struck me maybe that the hesitation isn't opposition. Maybe it's unfamiliarity. We've marched together before. We've protested together before. We've gathered in moments before. But we have almost never been asked to build together. Not symbolically, not emotionally, structurally. On a level where coordination matters more than passion. So this isn't a question of willingness. It may be a question of imagination. Because when a people have spent generations fighting for entry into systems, the idea of designing systems feels unnatural, sometimes even impossible. And that's where the shift happened for me. We spent decades asking where power is. But power was never the volume of our voice. Power is when reality begins to carry your design. Resistance changes moment. Construction changes history. So I've stopped thinking like a participant and started thinking like a commander. Not louder, not harder, clearer. Because the military permanently changes one habit in you. You no longer see arguments, you see terrain. You stop asking who's right, you start asking what exists. After 25 years in uniform, you don't look at a country and see states, parties, or factions. You see a single operational environment, one room, millions of people, same room, different specialities, different roles, different capabilities. And the question is never who agrees. The question should be, how do these assets function together? In that world, success is never built on inspiration alone. It is built on the correct alignment. Not everyone lead, not every not everyone's engineers, not everyone plans. But victory happens when the right skill is placed in the right position at the right time. Assigning the wrong role, failure multiplies. Assign the correct role, capacity compounds. That's not theory, that's doctrine. So when I look at America, I don't see 50 separate places. I see one crowded room where nobody has been introduced. And I'm talking to you, black people. Educators on one side, engineers on another, veterans in the corner, civic leaders across the hall, institutions working, but rarely synchronized. Not because they oppose each other, because no one called the room to order. And leadership at its highest level is not speaking the loudest inside the room. It is turning individuals into a coordinated capability. So the question for me was never who should represent us. The question became, if this entire nation were my available personnel, how would I organize it to accomplish a mission? And the mission is simple. Not commentary, not symbolism. Contribution you can point to on a map. Before I lay out how this works, we need a common definition of what I'm actually talking about, guys. Because if we don't define the objective correctly, every step that follows will sound like opinion instead of strategy. When most people hear the phrase Black Power, an image appears, a raised fist, a march, a chant, a moment. And don't get me wrong, those moments mattered deeply. There was a time in this country when being seen was survival, when visibility itself was leverage, when recognition was the first form of protection. But the phase of that struggle had a purpose, entrance. Earlier, I said we're no longer standing outside the door. That line only matters if we remember that line only matters if we remember what outside actually looked like. Outside meant your name could disqualify you before you spoke. Outside meant outside meant the front entrance existed, but not for you. Outside meant uniforms you could fight in, but not lead in. Books you could carry, but not learn from beside others. Courts where you stood, but justice did not stand for you. Outside meant the nation could use your labor while denying your presence. It meant building rail lines you could freely ride, paying taxes into schools your children couldn't enter, defending the flag in a war and returning home to negotiate basic dignity. That was outside. And I say all that to say that gaining entry mattered. Doors opened, seats existed, positions became reachable. And now we sit in places once guarded from us. Inside classrooms, inside agencies, inside command structures, inside laboratories, courtrooms, engineering teams. So if we still define power only as an expression, then we are acting as we are still trying to be seen instead of deciding what gets built. Because protest is the language of the excluded. Design is the responsibility of the included. I'm act silly right now, but I'm act silly in a way that makes sense. As I say again, because protest is the language of the excluded, and design is the responsibility of the included. You know, in a functioning nation, real power is not measured by the ability to react to the structure. Real power is the ability to shape the structure. It is measured by the ability to alter it. Power is when roads change because you designed them. Power is when policy exists because you drafted them. Power is when systems behave differently because you engineered them. That's the power I'm talking about bringing forward, guys. Not this corruption of power that we're seeing throughout the world right now. Power is permanence. And permanence requires planning. Permanence never comes from moments. So I stopped asking how power looks and started asking how power operates. Or better yet, how do we show power? What would it look like if we operated power the way I've been talking about, the way I just laid it out for you? If a people who once were forced to build a nation for free became the people who deliberately improved that nation by design, not emotionally, not reactively, but structurally, I think the full circle of the American story would come true. That would not just be representation. That would be authorship. So what I'm laying out today, guys, is not a protest movement. It's not a motivational speech. It's not even really a political message. It's a coordination proposal. Multiple efforts running at the same time across different sectors, all improving the country in measurable ways. And like I said at the beginning, and I'm going to say this again because I know some of you ain't going to get this. I'm going to answer that question that some of you may be thinking about but haven't been said aloud. Is this meant for everyone? Why does it begin with Black leadership? Not because we are better, not because others are excluded, and not because the country belongs to one group more than another. It begins with us because the role we've already played in American history. We're the only people in this country that were brought here with their past deliberately erased, language fragmented, family separated, culture stripped, and still forced to function inside a system that denied them. So we learned something unusual. We learned how to build identity without inheritance, how to cooperate across differences to survive, how to navigate institutions before those institutions accepted us, how to improve spaces we did not yet control, but yet depended on. Every stage of our history required adaptation first, recognition later. And that produces a certain civic instinct. When you have spent generations fighting to be included in a nation, you tend to care deeply whether the nation works at all. When you have spent generations fighting to be included in a nation, you tend to care deeply whether the nation works at all. So this is not a claim of ownership. It's a continuation of responsibility. Dr. King's generation forced open the door. I strongly believe our generation's obligation is to help stabilize what is inside that door for everyone now standing in the same house. You know, I heard that right before King died, he said that he was concerned about whether or not he was leading his people into a burning house. You know, for me, that's neither here nor there because we're in the house now. We have to figure out if it's burning, what can we do to put some water on this to cool this down and start rebuilding this the way it needs to look? That's why this begins here, not to center one people, but to unite the effort. Because I strongly believe that once this plan exists, once, I sit down and talk to all these different levels of, lanes of execution, the leadership for those lanes, I strongly expect them to, call their counterparts, whoever they may be, and say, hey, we're working to improve this country. Do you want to join us? And that's how coordination spreads, not by command, but by replication. The leadership is simply the start in it for energy. This is something that we need. It's something we can do. We have the agencies to do it. But the execution belongs to anyone willing to help us carry it forward. You don't have to be Black to build a bridge. You don't have to be Black to improve the school. You don't have to be Black to help design systems that make daily life function better. But historically, movements in America often begin with the people who most needed the promise kept, and then expand outward until the whole country lives under that improvement. So think of this not as a hand claiming control, but as a hand starting the work and inviting others to grab tools. Because in an integrated country, progress cannot belong to one community. If it works, it spreads. If it spreads, it becomes American. That's simple. Keeping with American history, we will expand the promise a little further. This is simply the next step in the same story. Not unity in slogans, unity in shared work. Not symbolic power, structural responsibility. And when the structure works, everybody rises with it. That is what I mean when I say Black power in this moment. It's not exclusion. It is stewardship. Not control, responsibility. Not for one people, but for the United States of America. And I believe the globe. That is the Black power. That is what Black power becomes when in a mature phase. Not the power to demand change, but the power to organize change. Not symbolic influence, structural contribution. Structural contribution. And if we ever reach the point where major pieces of American infrastructure, education, housing, civic order, and resource stability improve because Black Americans organize that improvement, then the conversation about whether we belong here ends forever. Because contributors don't ask for a place in history. They write it. And what you just heard tonight is an opening chapter of an attempt to do exactly that. But I'm going to pause right here because the next part of this conversation deserves more than we have time left in this episode. I told you before this that I left an execution matrix. It's only an overview. It's the architecture, the blueprint, the outline of the coordinated action across multiple sectors that could actually stabilize this country. But every one of those initiatives has a depth behind it. Each one has steps, responsibilities, organizations, capabilities. And I want to walk through them carefully. So I'm going to break this into two parts. This episode was about the vision and the framework. The next episode will go step by step through the execution matrix, explaining what each initiative does, why those organizations are listed, and how those efforts could realistically operate together to produce measurable improvements in America. And guys, please understand something. This was not a normal podcast for me. This was serious. Because I've been watching this country for a long time, like many of you. Like I said earlier, waiting to see someone organize real structured solutions instead of just commentary. Waiting for something real enough that I could say, all right, there it is. Where do you need me? Because that's how soldiers think. Give me the mission, show me the structure, point me in the direction, and I'll move. I've been waiting to see something organized enough, disciplined enough, serious enough, where it doesn't involve somebody else's profit in somebody else's pocket, that I can bring my skills to and spirit and say, what we've mostly been given are platforms that were built for us to operate inside of, platforms designed to manage reaction, not produce coordination. And those platforms aren't getting us where we need to go. Not because people don't care, not because people lack intelligence, but because the structure itself was never designed for the level of alignment we actually need. So what this podcast represents is something different. Not abandoning the system, not breaking the rules, but building a new operating platform within the same framework. One that allows talent, institutions, and leadership to align in a way that actually produces measurable progress. And that's why I say this with confidence. The power exists. The capability exists. You can see right there in the matrix that I created. The institutions exist. The engineers exist. The educators exist. The legal minds exist. Veterans exist. The builders exist. We have all the pieces. What we have not done yet is align them. And that's what I'm here to do. Not fighting each other, not competing for attention, but coordinating. And that's what this conversation is about. If you know someone in these organizations listed in the matrix, Noble, the Urban League, HBCU leadership, veteran organizations, engineering groups, any Black organization that you know of, send them the matrix. Send them this episode. Because in the next part, I'm going to talk directly about what I believe the institutions are capable of doing to help stabilize this country. I'm not doing this for politics, not for headlines, but for the nation we all live in. Look around you. Look around you. How much longer do we have to see the same ugly? I'm talking about the poor neighborhoods. A lot of them that we know about. And let me clear something. I don't claim to have all the answers, but I do have a plan. And plans only matter when serious people decide to execute them. And I believe that can happen. I really do. Because everything that needs to exist already exists. We just have to decide to align them. So if this conversation resonates with you guys, stay with me. Because in the next episode, we'll go deeper, initiative by initiative, step by step, into what operating power actually looks like. Until then, thank you for taking the time to listen. This is Christopher George, the Solution Series. And this conversation, guys, is just getting started.